Hey everybody, it's Lindsay here at Maple Street Guitars, and it's another beautiful day here in Atlanta. And as part of our normal day-to-day routine of tuning and grooming our guitars, we've discovered that one of our favorites, a Martin D15M, has some dead strings. So we thought we'd take an opportunity to go over with y'all how we restring a steel string acoustic guitar, and also some tips about restringing. So before we get into actually restringing the guitar, we'll go over a couple of the accessories that you would need in order to do a good job. Though not essential, a peg winder is a really handy thing in your friend. It makes twisting the pegs on the guitar much easier. These can range anywhere from a couple bucks on up to 14 or 15 bucks. Usually in conjunction with your peg winder, you want a really good pair of nippers. We recommend channel locks or something of good quality steel, and that they'll hold up to long-term use, but these shouldn't cost you too much at a hardware store. Some options also include a peg winder with an integrated clipper. This is made by Planet Waves. It's a really handy thing, all in one tool. Besides that, you will probably want a fingerboard oil. We have a couple here, one from Music Nomad, the other from Kaiser. A polish, some buffing pads. This is a 3M super fine sanding pad. You want to keep it really fine if you're using any kind of abrasive on the guitar. This is also a Scotch-Brite pad. We use both of these for buffing the fingerboard and or frets. A Quado or superfine steel wool is also acceptable. We'll go over a couple of the precautions one needs to take with steel wool. And then finally, these are some luxury items, shall we say, but very handy as well. These are neck rests. So Music Nomad sells a really cool one here. It can function as a neck rest for the guitar, where the neck rests here, but otherwise has some cool cubby holes for your stuff. So we like that. And then this is a shotgun rest, actually, we got from a local place here, Chuck's Firearms, and it also does a great job as a guitar neck rest. So whether or not you use all of these things or just a few of them, they're definitely handy when changing the strings on the guitar. So of course, an obvious question when it comes to restringing your guitar is, when do I need new strings? Well, there's a couple telltale indicators that will let you know that your strings are dead. One, they'll have a kind of tubby, less defined tone. Some folks who have a tendency to wear out strings can achieve this really quickly, but otherwise they'll also look oxidized. So up here, strings are very nice and clear and bright looking. Further down the fingerboard, we've got some serious kind of oxidation and gunk. So believe it or not, sometimes strings can actually sound pretty good in this situation, but usually when you start seeing this, your strings are toast. So as a rule of thumb, if you're using the guitar regularly, you should expect to change your strings every 2 to 3 months, but people who play heavily might have to do much more regularly than that. So another question that comes up frequently is, what kind of string should I use? The brand of string doesn't matter so much, and in fact we recommend that you experiment with various brands to try out new things, but overall the most critical thing is to ensure that you use the same gauge of string. This ensures that you have the same amount of tension on the guitar. Keep in mind the guitar is adjusted for a certain tension, and if you change that, the guitar's setup or action might react. So if you're unsure about the gauge of string that is on your guitar, you can always bring it by to us and we'll happily measure it with some calipers here, which are otherwise available at various hardware stores and things like that. You can also check with the manufacturer on their website or by giving them a call, but assuming you're happy with the setup of the guitar, just remember to keep the same gauge of string on there. Otherwise, once you've established what kind of gauge you like and what kind of brand perhaps, I recommend that you keep the packaging from your previous restring, and I like to date it as well. That gives you an indication of when you last changed strings. So generally speaking, one might restring a guitar one string at a time. But in the case of this guitar, we're going to remove all the strings at once so that we can oil and recondition the fingerboard. So it's okay to do this in that a guitar can withstand not having any tension on it for a short period of time. but you don't ever really want to leave string tension off a guitar for an extended period of time. So for any of y'all who have heard conflicting evidence or who are concerned about taking all the strings off at once, I assure you that this will be okay. The only time one might not do that is when we're dealing with a different type of guitar that has a floating bridge or a tune-o-matic bridge, those being mostly electric guitars. So here we're okay. So I'm going to use my handy-dandy peg winder here, again a Planet Waves, which we've padded out actually. This is a good tip to prevent it from scarring certain types of tuners. That's just a simple t-shirt in there or a polished cloth. And one way in which I ensure that I'm actually going the right direction with the peg winder is I actually hit the string and listen for the pitch to go down. Like so. So we're going to do this for each of the strings and get them off, and then we will clean the fingerboard. So when it comes to trimming the strings, we've got them all slack. You don't want to trim them under tension. I like to trim them a little bit past the body joint here above the fingerboard. This ensures that some bit of the string isn't hanging out over the top of your guitar, which may have a delicate finish. You might really want to avoid having any sharp end be over this region of the guitar. So we've trimmed them in the middle. Now they'll be easy to pull off. So there are a lot of different methods to stringing the guitar, and they all have certain pros and cons. But one area where a lot of folks get messed up is how to anchor the string here at the post. This can be a little bit daunting, but in truth you do not have to get very sophisticated. You certainly don't need to be tying strings or making lots of knots or complicated winds. In the case of this has a Martin tie. So this involves looping the string around the tail end. And while this is a tried and true method, it is a little bit more irksome to remove the string. So we have a different method for this. But I just wanted to show you real quickly that this does involve a little bit more work to get the string off. Now if you're new to stringing the guitar, this is a good opportunity actually to practice something. So I often recommend using the old string just to practice stuff if you are a little uncertain. So the type of anchor that we use here I refer to as a Z-kink, but it's a very simple bend in the string. So when the string is fresh, we actually feed it in such that it's passing diagonally through the post, and then we kink it down on the inside of the post, or the headstock rather, and up on the outside, thus kind of straightening the string. That's the mnemonic I use, and it's very strong. I can put a lot of tension on this and it doesn't slip. And then rather than tying or doing anything like that, we end up just winding below the hole. So more on that later. The other critical part of properly restringing the guitar is ensuring that the strings are anchored here at the bridge. And I find that a lot of folks who are new to the guitar get confused about the role of the bridge pin. The bridge pin is actually very simple. It's just there to obscure the hole and prevent the string from coming up through the bridge, but ideally it actually forces the ball end forward onto the bridge plate. There is no need, therefore, to force these down. If they're not sitting flush against the bridge and that bothers you, you can also ream out these holes to make them sit a little bit better. Martins in particular tend to sit a little proud of the bridge, but that all aside, just know that you do not have to force these down in order to properly anchor it. That only makes your life harder when you have to restring the guitar. And as a result, if they're properly seated, it should just take a little bit of pressure towards the pin and finger pressure to pull it out. Easy. To further demonstrate the role of the bridge pin on the guitar, we have the bridge plate right here. This is the inside of a Martin guitar. And this ball end is properly seated. You can see how the bridge pin has pushed it forward. It is now resting on the bridge plate. And once tension is on this bad boy, you almost don't even need the bridge pin to hold it in place. But again, this is illustrating its role of simply obscuring the hole and preventing this ball end from coming back out. This is an example of a poorly seated ball end. Typically, once you start putting tension on the string, it's going to force the pin back out. But again, this is to demonstrate that the pin is not there to hold the ball end in place. It is merely there to force it forward. So, properly seated, improperly seated. So before we go on to putting strings on this guitar, we're going to take the opportunity to recondition the fingerboard. As this guitar is pretty new, it doesn't need a whole lot of oil, so we're going to use a lighter oil. This is a fingerboard 1 made by Music Nomad. And then we're going to buff these frets just to get rid of any residual finger goo or oxidation. And we're going to use a Scotch-Brite pad for that. Again, an alternative is a steel wool. Again, this is super fine. Quadruple O, very, very fine stuff. You do not want to use heavier steel wool or a heavier Scotch-Brite pad. Be sure to use separate cloths for your oil. If you use any kind of polished cloth or long-term kind of flannel cloth for your oil, you definitely want to keep that away from your polished cloth that you would use on the body of the guitar, because they can pick up stuff like these steel wool fibers, which you end up rubbing into the guitar, and nobody likes that. So again, just a word to the wise, keep all your oil kit separate from the rest of your polish kit. So since this guitar doesn't have any fret wear or any kind of issue to worry about, we're not going to worry about sanding the frets or doing any kind of light crown on them. We're just going to oil and buff them. So it is always better to be conservative with oils. A little bit can go a long way. So I'm just going to use a very little bit of this oil on a paper towel. And we will just apply it directly to the fingerboard, rubbing in a circular motion. And we're going to let that soak in for a minute. I'm going to also move on to the bridge, and we'll take care of the bridge separately. So before we go buffing the frets, having let this oil soak in a little bit, you'll note that I have taped off a section of the fingerboard here over the body, and this is just to prevent any fibers from my Scotch-Brite pad or steel wool from getting onto the surface of the guitar. One of the reasons we use these Scotch-Brite pads, in fact, is because they generate fibers that are less abrasive than the steel wool. But when it comes to buffing the fingerboard, you just want to go in a light motion with the grain of the fingerboard. If you go against the grain, you could potentially scar the fingerboard. And there we go, nice and clean. Having just buffed the fingerboard, I often use the oily rag that I have just to go back over, apply a little extra oil, but it also helps to pick up anything that might have been left on the fingerboard by the buffing pad. We get some nastiness there, so obviously that did its job. And then I come over with a clean piece of paper towel or an unused section of your oil rag, and I just pull off the excess after having done that last little application. And I again picked up some more stuff there, and then I do the same on the bridge. All right, now before we go putting the strings on, we have an opportunity to just clean off the guitar, especially in this area underneath the strings, which frequently gets pretty dusty, and also the headstock. Now y'all might have noticed I didn't tape off the bridge on this, so don't tell my father, but normally I would have put a little perimeter around this bridge as well. Maybe not enough coffee today, but fortunately I have a deft hand when it comes to oiling, so I didn't get any oil on the face of the guitar. But we will go ahead and clean up the face, get it ready for some strings. We like to usually put the polish onto the cloth as opposed to spraying it directly on the top. But a light misting is okay. So Now I'm going to clean the headstock and we'll get some strings on this bad boy. So now we're ready to put the strings on, and I've got everything laid out in front of me to make this nice and fast. I do like to keep the bridge pins in the same order that they were on the guitar, so I lay those out in order. For some manufacturers, like Collings guitars, they actually fit these specifically for each string, so that makes this process even more critical. But generally speaking, these are universal, so it's not too bad if you get them out of order. But I have a bit of a Henry Ford approach here if we're going through this whole reconditioning bit and not going one string at a time. So I will get them all anchored at the bridge at the same time, and then we will tie them all up here at the headstock at the same time. So to reiterate, when it comes to putting this ball end in place, we do not have to make this very complicated. If it's properly seated, typically the additional winding at the very base of the string will be visible at the very top of the hole here. So all I do is I stick this ball end in so that it barely clears the soundboard. You usually can feel it kind of fall into place. And then I put the grooved side or fluted side of the pin against the string, and I gently tug this as I push the string down. You do not want to kink this or give it a really hard bend. That will of course compromise the string, and it will probably break on you once you put it under tension. But this should feel very secure and pop in easily with little effort. So we'll do a couple more here real quickly. Now if you're real slick, you might just put them all into place like so. And that makes life real nice and easy. So just a gentle tug as I press down. Again, the ball end has just barely cleared the top. Gentle tug. Now, if you reach one that's kind of stubborn, sometimes it can help to give it just a little bit of a bend. Not much, just a little one. And there we go. So here we are at the perhaps most daunting side of restringing the guitar, getting it properly secured up here at the headstock. Now, one of the biggest issues that comes up is how much string length do I need? And you know, there's a little bit of fudge factor in this, but generally speaking, we shoot for 2 to 3 rotations around the post on the bass strings and even on the G string as well. And then 3 to 4 rotations around the post on the treble strings. I mentioned it earlier, but there is no need to have excessive winding up there. In fact, that will actually make it harder for your guitar to get stable in its tuning. That's a lot of material it has to stretch through and stabilize. And on the other side of things, you do not want only a little bit of wind or a half wind or something like that. That's where your string will likely come loose. So there are a couple methods to doing this. One that I've found is pretty secure, or reliable I should say, is to stretch the string such that it's taut, grab it at the nut, and back it out about a fret. And this is about how much slack you might want. I find that this also translates to about a palm's breadth around the 7th fret. So these are pretty reliable ways of just approximating how much string you need. Okay, so having approximated how much string we need, I'm ready to anchor it up here. So again, I've gotten this hole and all the others at a downward angle. This side is at a mirror image, so the downward angle looks like this. And that of course makes the string look like an arch as it comes through the post. And again, you can pull this pretty taut, give yourself about a palm's breadth at the 7th fret. And then, as I showed earlier, we're going to kink the string down on the inside of the headstock and up on the outside. This is perhaps where people get most confounded. Now, if we were to try to just wind the string slack, it will not behave and it'll want to pop over the post and dance around on you. So it's important to keep tension on the string as you wind it, and that can be a little bit tricky. One method I use is to pull up on it with my fingers here and press against those with my index finger. So another method is to pull the string to the side of the headstock as you wind. But whether you use the index finger or your thumb to guide the string, you want to keep tension on it as you wind below the post hole. Now, once you feel the string get taut, you can release it and then use your clippers to trim the string flush with the top of the post. I guess if you want to be rock and roll, you can coil them up, but I prefer them to look clean. So we've got the bass strings on the guitar, and now to reiterate the process, but also to demonstrate the fact that the treble side is just the mirror image of the bass side, we're going to go through putting the G string on here. Yes, there are lots of jokes about the G string. So I've gotten this hole, again, at a downward angle such that when the string passes from the inside of the headstock to the outside, it's heading down towards the body of the guitar. And I take most of the slack out of it. Obviously that's too much, so we're going to scoot that back a little bit, make sure I've got a palm's breadth towards the middle of the neck. We're going to kink the string down on the inside, up on the outside. Again, that's very strong, that little Z kink. And then I'm going to keep tension on the string. It's, again, like I'm pulling up on the string. I'm going to do this with my left hand this time, but you could do it with your right hand if you prefer. So I'm keeping tension on the string and using my index finger to guide it down. Again, you could use your thumb if you prefer, or even pull it to the outside. But if you do not keep tension on it, it will not be easy to control the string as you wind. Now, if you get this situation where the string's kind of catching on the adjacent posts and it will want to try and whip you, you can just pull it up a little bit, and that usually solves the problem. There we go. And just to show you how quick and zippy I am, we're going to do the B string as well. There you go. The last step in stringing the guitar is to get the guitar tuned up to pitch or something close to it, and then stretch the strings. This is an often overlooked step, but by stretching the strings you kind of get their initial settling out of the equation, and your guitar will be much more stable in tuning as you play it. So the approach I take is just to get the string close to pitch. Does not have to be exact, we're pretty close here, a little flat. And then, much like how we controlled the string at the headstock while winding it, we're going to use kind of counter tension. So I'm going to pull the string sideways in one direction, use my thumb to go against that. And I want to stress here that we are not being really forceful with the string. It's a gentle tug, but we just kind of do this going the length of the string. And you want to go side to side, not up. So we do this for each string. Maybe be a little more careful with the G string as it's pretty light and can break easily. And you'll hear immediately that this fell in pitch. So I tune it back up again. And I do this one more time. it did not fall that much this time. Finally, one last couple set of tugs here towards the bridge, and that's about as much stretching as we want to do. So after you've done this, the guitar is going to be much more stable, and of course with the nice fresh strings it's going to sound its best. So once again, this is Lindsay at Maple Street Guitars, and I hope you found our demonstration about restringing and our particular method for doing it helpful. Of course, if you prefer to have us do this service for you, we're happy to do that, as we offer restrings and all other kinds of repairs. But hopefully you've learned enough here that you can save your $20 and do the stringing yourself. But if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to give us a call or find us on the web at maplestreetguitars.com.